Friends, what has been really terrible to see taught in the Christian church in recent years is that in the gospel era, reverence and awe for God, godly fear are unnecessary and actually should not be present. That anything can go, that God is not to be feared, and our worship can be as irreverent as we would like it to be. It has gotten so bad, and I'm not joking here. There are literally clowns, literal clowns in the public worship of God in some churches today. Entertaining the goats, amusing crowds in churches in the public meeting of God's worship. Why? Because we have lost sight of who God is, the judge of all, the consuming fire. And if you think that in some way Jesus has changed who God is, you must understand that is heresy. God is the same. And not only that, your mediator, who was in a state of humiliation, is now in a state of exaltation, such that if you saw him now, as John saw him in Revelation 1, how did John see him? In the midst of the seven candlestick, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with the garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword. And his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. That is Jesus Christ today. That is who you have come to worship, I trust. And what was John's response to meeting Jesus in this way? And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. Even through Jesus, you would have to be a fool to approach God irreverently. Public worship is dangerous, friends. It will either bless your soul if you come to worship God through Jesus Christ, or it will harm you. That's what public worship does. There must be a sense of that gravity before us as we assemble to meet God. We meet God. You remember when our series on public worship began, we began with Leviticus 10, and we saw Nadab and Abihu struck dead in the public worship of God. And then we heard in 1 Corinthians 11:28, when we considered the Lord's Supper, in the supper many have died as they have partook unworthily. He that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation to himself. Public worship is dangerous, friends. In the public worship of God, we come into the presence of Almighty God, which is why we read in 1 Corinthians 14, what happens when an unbeliever has his heart open to perceive that God is here among us? Paul said, and thus are the secrets of his heart made manifest. And so falling down on his face, he will worship God and report that God is in you of a truth. 1 Corinthians 14:25. That is someone who has been struck with the presence of God, and he has the sense, as Moses did long ago, to fall on his face because God is here. In Hebrews 12, what you are hearing tonight is that worship in the New Testament is not less dangerous than in the Old Testament, which is what we normally think. It's not less dangerous, first of all, because, as I mentioned earlier, because we worship the very same God. Second, New Testament worship is actually more deadly than the Old Testament.